The topic today really is the realities of budgets and nonprofits. In normal times and in very unusual times that we're in now, nonprofits really rarely, if anybody knows of one, please share it, but most nonprofits have you can only cover the budget needs through their core activity, whether it's medical fees or library fees or tuition or ticket sales, that only covers part of what you need to operate. And, the rest of it has to be made up by fundraising and other things. And one of the reasons I like having Matt and Dion, who I'll introduce in just a second for this, is that they both have, they're both vets of the industry. They both had senior leadership positions as internal development leaders, chief development officers, but they've also had a lot of years as consultants and teachers. And they're both very entrepreneurial. And I think one of the things I like about this session is that, we're presenting mostly from the point of view of board members and executive directors, because we know that's who most of the people calling in are, and most of the people who belong to Beacon are. So it's from your point of view, and a lot of our presentation is on fundraising and how boards can engage with that and be supportive of the staff, the paid staff, and the organization, the nonprofit that you're trying to serve, but also other ideas, because there are a host of other ideas, and both Matt and Dion have experience in this, of just sort of other things you can do to bring in revenue, that it's, I think, great for board members to sort of go down the checklist and think, well, are any of these available to us? So we're going to review some of those as well. So I want to thank Matt Hug and Dion Jackson for being our panelists and presenters today. As I said before, they're both, I will let them both introduce themselves in more detail, but they both have been senior development officers. They've been in charge of fundraising for sizable institutions, and have also done quite and now really work as consultants primarily. So I'm going to hand it off to you guys. I know there's slides you want to share, and then we'll feed in questions as we go.
Sounds good. Dion, do you want to introduce yourself, and I'll get the screen set up here, and then I'll pick it up.
All right, great. Thank you, Matt. Good morning, everyone. I'm really delighted to be here. Hope everybody is staying safe and healthy in this unusual time. But again, really delighted to be here. I'm Dion Jackson, and I am the founder of a firm, a Philadelphia-based firm called Steep Trajectory. And what we essentially do is we do fundraising, consulting. In my career, I guess spanning about 20 years, me and my teams have raised about $100 million for organizations around the country. Now, I know that sounds like a lot of money. It is. But one of the things that was really key to my success is, helping organizations to to find previously untapped resources. And you get to 100 million, you get to a number like that really quickly when you aren't going to the same well all the time, the same resources all the time. So, that is, if anyone is feeling discouraged, there's still hope. I can assure you there are resources that you have not tapped into as well. So I'm really delighted to be here. Thank you.
Cool. And well, first of all, you can see the slides, right? Great. And my name's Matthew Hug, and I run a website, an online education platform called nonprofit.courses. Just so you know, it's not .com or at the end or .org. It's just .courses, one of the two new top-level domains. And there's about 1,200 or so free videos on there on all sorts of nonprofit educational opportunities. And really, for the last lots of years, I don't know, 15 years or so, I've been focused in one way or another in nonprofit management education. So let's see, before 2005, when I started my own business, I was the Chief Development Officer at University of the Arts, and then at Ursinus College, I was helped run things there. I was AVP there, University of Cincinnati before that. And what I do now is help facilitate education for folks in a broad variety of ways. I teach at Thomas Edison State University it's in Trenton, but it's actually New Jersey's online continuing education school. So in fact, I have a grant writing course coming up in the next few days. And I've taught at Eastern. Eastern actually had me in Senegal and Uganda and Cambodia and Italy. And then at Penn for a while too, at the Fells School. But what we're going to talk about today, like we said, is how money is working now in nonprofits and some of the options you have. And my specialty is fundraising, but there are a lot of other ways that you can generate income for the nonprofit. And so let's jump right in. So first thing to say is that it is a board's responsibility to handle the fiscal management of the organization. Right now, there are a lot of ways that boards work, and Dion, I know you can. We're going to figure out how we toss this back and forth, but Dion, you're going to chime in on this too. But you know, a typical model is that a board will deal with strategic decisions and strategic matters, and a staff or the volunteers will run the tactical situation. Of course, there are other ways that boards operate, maybe a working board where they kind of do both, but the bottom line is that the boards have money responsibilities, and that includes generating revenue.
And what I'll say here is to that point that Matt just made, it's not just money responsibility in terms of counting every penny, right? You as a board members need to, of course, be concerned about the overall fiscal health of the organization, but that also, and the budget and who's responsible for what, but it also comes down to, like Matt said, either giving or getting, bringing resources into the organization.
Yeah, because if you look at it, the board touches money in a number of ways. It comes in. Whoop. Oh, we got our first echo there. Cool. The board touches money in the income, and then monitors how it's spent, and then works very carefully at making sure that that spending is being reflected correctly to the public, and so that you can account for it. So there's this whole flow of income, and then the actual program expenditures, and then on the back end, the accounting part of it. So, right, there are, one of the big things you have to do is decide what kind of revenue generation system you want to use. And we lay out 3 of them here. We're going to get into more detail on each of these, but it's some combination of solicitation revenue, government revenue, earned revenue. Janine brought up in the very beginning about like earned revenue, fees and all that, but we'll talk about each of these. All right, let's jump right in here. Solicitation revenue. Dion, you want to?
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. So I think solicitation revenue is largely what everybody is very familiar with outside of earned revenue. Solicitation revenue can include fundraising, one-to-one solicitations, whether it's for smaller gifts, you might call them your annual fund. Then you may have larger gifts that come in. They may be major gifts for your organization, depending on the size and the budget of your organization. And then of course you have your leadership or principal gifts where some of your donors may be making lifetime commitments, right? Whether they are in cash or securities or in somebody's will or a bequest. But that money that comes in, whether it's from on a one-on-one solicitation basis, that's typically fundraising, philanthropic efforts from individuals. Then, of course, grants, foundations. We're all familiar with foundations. That whole process, you cultivate them. That's actually a very great way of getting money into your organization. However, it can be more challenging. It can take a longer time to cultivate those relationships and get onto the foundation's radar. But once they start to pay off for your organization, they're really beneficial.
And one important point to make about grants is that, you know, foundations aren't ATMs, right? And you really do have to build that relationship. It's not a matter of just writing a proposal and getting the money. I mean, one of the things that when I walked into this grant proposal course I was telling you about was that it started when I first took it over with, okay, let's start writing. And the answer is no. Let's go back and are we grant ready? Have we identified the source? Have we built a relationship with the source? Have we built our own internal structures to support that grant once it's in? Do we have the paperwork in place so that we can actually prove that we are a viable organization that's trustworthy with the money? And between fundraising and grants, it's important to remember that grants are oftentimes like an endorsement, because foundations in particular will really vet a potential grant recipient. And so you might get less money from a foundation for a grant, but it will mean a lot more, and you can use that as leverage to raise other money. The other part to know between fundraising and grants is that about 70%, and actually if you count things like private businesses and other areas, maybe into the 80% of money in solicitation money comes from individuals, not from institutional sources, not from corporations or foundations. And that's really important to remember, because a lot of folks jump right to getting grants or going to companies for money, which is great. They're good sources, but you're missing out on 70% of your potential revenue because you're not looking to individuals. But it's not as comfortable to ask individuals for money. And that's, I think, a lot of reasons why people go for the institutional money.
You know, I just want to say something really quickly, Matt, before you jump into your next point. You know, board participation is really so key when you're going to approach a foundation for a grant. You know, by the time they start evaluating your proposal, who's on board, they want to know that your board is giving at 100. Number one, there's 100% participation, and that they're giving to fullest capacity. So in other words, you know, if you have 10 board members on your board and only 6 are giving, that's a red flag for the foundation, because it says to them, well, if your closest supporters aren't supporting you, why should we? Number two, if you have, you know, millionaires on your board and they're only writing $1,000 checks, then that's another red flag, because again, it says to your external supporters, the foundation who you're trying to cultivate, it says to them, you know, they say, well, if they have this resource on the board, what's wrong here? Why aren't they getting more support from this individual? So I just wanted to add those 2 points.
No, that's excellent. And the other thing that comes to mind as you were talking about that is that, let's say, because, you know, you might have a well-connected board, and that's great. And you, somebody on staff or on your board says, oh, look at these people who are on that foundation's board. Be careful, because I mean, you want to be able to have connections, but you also want to connect with them properly. For example, I don't know if many of you know Virginia France at Montgomery County Foundation, but Virginia has told me specifically that if somebody talks to one of her board members in support of a grant application that they have sent into the Montgomery County Foundation, that board member recuses themselves, walks out of the room. I mean, they put like an isolation chamber around that board member to be away from that decision-making process. So some will operate that way, and you're really shooting yourself in the foot by approaching them. Others want that interaction input because it builds trust. So you really have to know what their rules are on that interaction before you blithely go and start calling people and say, hey, we got this great proposal coming to your organization. It's just important to know how they operate that way. Indeed.
So,
yeah, please.
Matt, would you like to take the last two, or would you like me to?
Well, I'll start with so sponsorships and memberships. Okay, the idea here is that there is a return for the either sponsorship, right, which is a corporate kind of word for this, or membership, which is an individual approach to it. You might buy a $25 membership to an organization, and they're going to give you 3 free tickets and access, for like discount at the bookstore or whatever. There is a returnable or on that membership, just like sponsorship would be for a corporation. And so these things actually are not tax deductible, at least the up to the value of that of whatever those deliverables are. That's the word I was looking for, deliverables. And so they are different than a charitable gift. And it's just important to keep in mind that it might feel like a charitable gift solicitation. It might look like one, but you are giving beyond what the IRS considers a nominal recognition for that as an organization. And so that changes the nature of that transaction and makes them sponsorships and memberships, not just charitable gifts. And then endowment income is put in here because while endowment is like, your savings account for your organization, right? And it's going to spin off some interest. And of course, you're going to have policies and all that around it, and spending policies and investment policies and all that. But that's here because the core of an endowment is donated funds. So somebody will donate money that will be designated to your endowment, and then that money is treated differently. There's also something called Quasi Endowment, which is essentially monies that your organization treats like an endowment, but you designated into that, often from surpluses you might have during the year that you would be able to designate as endowment. But the nice thing is that you can spend that. You can go into that and grab it out when you need it. Or a true endowment, you have to get Orphans Court or you have to get special permission to get into the corpus of that. Yes.
I'll add this. I think that, I've been in one of my roles an executive director of a foundation, and for a small or nonprofit performing arts organization. And I know with certainty that the endowment, I think it was about $13 million, and the organization had an annual operating budget of about $1 million. So the endowment spun off about $500,000 each year. And actually it spun off more, but that's what we chose to spend towards the budget. If you're interested in permanence, if your donors are interested in building a legacy, if the founder of your organization wants to see the organization last beyond them, having an endowment is a critical part of that conversation. Because when there are budget fluctuations, when the fundraising doesn't come through like you anticipated, when the government is maybe pulling back or changing its priorities, having that endowment income there to fund perhaps the base of your operations or certain programs, et cetera, that's a critical step. That's what separates the organizations that are here for 3, 6, 10 years versus the ones that are here well into perpetuity.
And a way to build that endowment is going back to fundraising and looking at things like planned gifts, estate gifts and charitable gift annuities. Those kinds of giving is a big flow into endowments, as well as standard bequests, people leaving money in their will to your organization.
Yes.
All right, let's move on here. Earned income, earned revenue. Dion, you want to kick it off on this, or?
Sure. Earned revenue. Now, this is going to be different according to your organization. If you're a performing arts organization, if you're a theater, obviously your earned income could be ticket sales. It could be concession sales. It could be merchandise, etc. We've seen different organizations with different approaches to bringing money, earned income into the organization. Now, of course, as it relates to earned income, you have the business income, the non-mission related income, and then you also have the stuff that's more closely aligned to the mission.
Dion, where I have seen a really good example of this is if you walk into a college bookstore.
Yeah.
If you walk into a college bookstore, you will, most of them today have almost, in fact, they kind of have a fence. One I'm thinking of had built a fence in the middle of the store. And on one side of that fence were the books, the actual books that the students needed to use for their program. That was mission related. All that square footage, everything there was exempt from taxation. Everything on the outside of that fence, the hats, the sweatshirts, the little, all that stuff that you see in a college bookstore that's promotional, or even just other things like pens and pencils and all of that was taxable. And so they literally drew a line across the landscape there. So that might be a good visual mental image for you between the two. Like it says here, exempt, right? And that's unrelated business income tax, UBIT. It has to be either B, not all, but it's best if you can have more than one of these conditions: mission related, volunteer driven, or episodic. So if your Boy Scout troop sells Christmas wreaths, right, well, they're not mission related, but it is volunteer driven, and it only happens once a year, so it's episodic, so that is exempt from taxes. But if you set up a business selling those wreaths all year round and make a Christmas store out of it, now look for paying taxes, especially if you hire staff and all that. Dion, more on this?
Sure. So the fee for service income, that could be, some examples we've seen of that is where some organizations, perhaps they serve a certain client base, and they serve that client base, but they charge a certain fee for the service, and then that's credited as income. As it's noted here, it's usually from mission recipients. So perhaps there are cancer survivor organizations, certain other health-related organizations where they serve survivors, but the survivors receive benefits for a nominal fee, as an example. There are also maybe other educational examples.
Tuition would be this, right, for a school. The other thing to consider is that how this impacts mission is really important, because Dion brought up a good point. So let's say you have a cancer organization and that you have some nominal fee for services, right? That is offering dignity to the people receiving the service, because they feel like now they're kicking in and paying for something. And so a lot of times free isn't good. Not only is it not good for the bottom line, but it also isn't good on a mission basis, because you want to be able to give people some ownership, some way that they are actually contributing themselves to their own well-being, because psychologically that makes us feel better, emotionally that makes us feel better, or the people who are receiving that service.
And I'll also add to this, Matt, great points. It builds a closer relationship with your stakeholders.
Yeah.
You may have survivors or people who are receiving benefits, but at the same time, if your organization isn't determining who receives benefits according to their income, they may very well have resources that you're not aware of, and they may feel so closely aligned to your organization that this is, upon their passing, maybe there's a way that they want to give back, and or maybe their family members. But I think Matt raises an excellent point. Free isn't always good.
Yeah, it's right. Now, the last one we have here is third-party payments. And think of health insurance for a hospital, for a nonprofit hospital. That's a third-party payment. There's somebody else coming in who is not the entity of providing the service, and is not the person who is receiving the service, but it's a third party contributing to that mix. And usually third-party payments are tied to the mission recipient. They're being brought in with that. So in a school situation, you might have a state or federal grant that comes with that student that helps pay that tuition. Or maybe an outside foundation scholarship that helps pay that tuition. Or it could be their grandmother who comes in and helps pay that tuition. Those are third-party payments, and that can be a major source of revenue for a nonprofit, depending on what their service clientele is. And the consistency of that, and being able to kind of get into a system where third-party payments are a regular thing. Any more on this, Dion?
Nope.
Okay. So, government revenue, right? So many people think that oh, well, this is how nonprofits get real money, right? Well, yeah, it is in some ways. Nonprofits can serve as a de facto arm of a government, because some nonprofits just deal with government money, but it also is a good supplemental source, and there are a lot of different ways of coming into this. So first one on the list here is fee-for-service grants. And you'd be surprised, but but a lot of government money flows into the nonprofit in this category. So we're talking about getting a grant to, say, run a Head Start program, right? So they're not just giving that daycare center a grant of money and say, go do what you want with it. They're saying, we're going to give you this money. Now you have to produce this specific program. It's a contract, right? That's what we mean by fee-for-service programs, where they're getting that money to do something. Higher education taps into this all the time. We're talking about research and other programs that higher ed puts on, where like a typical research grant is a fee for service. The researcher writes a proposal, it goes to, say, NIH or NSF, and then they get the money back, but they have to produce a specific kind of research that is outlined in that grant proposal. Again, that's a contract for fee for service. Dion, any more on that point?
No, I'm going to spend a fair amount of time on tax credits, so I'm going to let you walk through the rest of this.
Fair enough. Okay. So legislative appropriations, great if you can get them. That's when you lobby, right, and nonprofits are allowed to hire lobbyists, and money is written into a bill specifically that gives you a certain amount of money, maybe for a project, maybe just to spend on your operating budget. And that requires everything that you might imagine to get an appropriation, to get your line put into some bill. Working with legislators, working with staffers, any number of things that way. Politician walking around money. This varies place to place, time to time, and which level of government, but in a lot of cases, a politician will have a cache of money that they are able to spend on their constituent services or in their constituency. And and so you can be a beneficiary of those funds. And that's just making sure that your program meets the goals of whatever that political entity is. Usually has to do with making jobs or some specific service in that district that is important to carry out. So these are all three of those are ways that government revenue flows into a nonprofit. And there's also a special way here that Dion's going to talk about.
Sure. Thank you, Matt. And you made some great points as it relates to tax credits. One of the things that are available, one thing that is available to organizations are tax credits, right? There are some that vary according to your city, your state. And one of the things that I've recently learned about are tax credits on the federal level. And I'm starting to spend a great deal of time working with business owners who want to redeem their tax credits. And I want to make a point of sharing this today and bringing this up with everybody because there's sometimes tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions of dollars that could be available within 6 weeks to some of your board members, if they're business owners, if they're entrepreneurs, if they have been building their companies over time, if they have some sort of creative element in their business, they may very well be leaving a lot of money on the table. I'll say there's an R&D tax credit that I recently learned about. And I think the Wall Street Journal reported out that over 1.78 out of 1.78 million corporate tax returns that are filed each year, on average, right? That are filed each year, only 20,000 small to medium size, only 20,000 businesses are actually taking advantage of some of the federal tax credits. And let's see, I think over 19 billion was actually awarded last year. $19 billion was awarded primarily to larger companies, but only 5% of small to medium-sized businesses actually receive some of that funding. So, there's a lot of money that's being made, that's being left on the table by business owners. And if they opt, the reason why I think this is so important for everybody on this call, whether you are an executive director, whether you're a board member, if you have people on your board or affiliated with your organization that are eligible for these tax credits, they literally can go through a process, get their checks back within 6 weeks, and do whatever they want with that money. And that could include donating back to your organization, establishing an endowment. Maybe they give it to a number of different organizations, but the fact is it's money that you don't necessarily have to fundraise for. Fundraising, all of this work, all of these different options that we're talking about, they're very labor intensive and they take time, right? But this is a way in which tax credits are often overlooked, and it's a really quick and easy way for business owners to get a lump sum of money back, and they can have as discretionary funding that they can set up an endowment or make a sizable major gift to your organization.
And then that's
Dion, this is David. I just have a quick question. Are there tax credits that you've seen nonprofits qualify for directly? So you've been talking about business owners who then would take their tax credits and donate them. But what about the nonprofits themselves?
Great question. I've not seen that. Yes, actually I have. And Matt, you might be able to speak to this more than I can. I've seen I've seen where there's Matt, what is the name of the local,
You mean the EITC?
yes, that's it.
Okay. Well,
yeah.
it's important to keep in mind that obviously nonprofits are non-taxable entities.
Yeah.
So there's going to have to be a business partner in here someplace, and EITC is where you see that, where there's a competition for those funds. And honestly, I have to tell you, I'm not an EITC expert, but when you get instead of pushing your money to the state government, in this case, it will go to the nonprofit because you're getting a credit for your taxes from the state. But these are typically K through 12 educational institutions.
Right.
So in your case, David, Boys and Girls Clubs, I believe, qualify for that because you are considered an educational entity within that bracket. So that's important to know that these are for education purposes, but that definition is stretched. It's not just your local school or your local private school that can benefit from those.
Yes.
Yeah, I'll chime in because Alex, we've got somebody on the call who knows it fairly well, and I know it a
Oh,
lot.
excellent.
So EITC is Pennsylvania, it's through DCED, right, Alex? Is that right?
Correct.
Yep. And it is, so state of Pennsylvania, educational purposes, but as Matt said, stretch. So, so David, your Boys and Girls Club, I think, is in New Jersey, but a lot of states have different tax credits. And then there's also something that I think is Philadelphia called NAP, Neighborhood Assistance Program. That's kind of like a tax credit.
I don't know how that works specifically.
I don't remember that one either, but EITC, just in case you don't know about it, so it's actually businesses apply to qualify for the EITC program, and they get the tax credit for their giving to nonprofits, and then nonprofits need to basically find those businesses and get on their list as one of the nonprofits benefited for their education-related.
But it's also available to individuals, believe it or not.
Oh,
so
I did not know that.
Nonprofit is then available, has tax credits, and then they can reach out to board members and other major donors who then can apply, can receive those tax credits on their Pennsylvania tax return. So it's another way for individual donors to contribute and actually get something back.
Okay. Now, Alex, is there a statewide cap on EITC money? In other words, the state only allows so much money to go to that program?
Yes. And so there's a finite number of credits that any nonprofit or I imagine business is eligible to obtain, which is why they really try and provide it to interested donors who are going to utilize and manage the entire credit pool.
Yeah, because I guess there's also a concern that if everybody did it, the state wouldn't have any money, right?
Well, but it's also a way for organizations, because the purpose behind it when it was set up was actually meant to provide money to parochial schools.
Yeah.
And in order to make it work politically, they had to expand it out to all schools. And then they had to expand it beyond that to make it politically saleable and salvable to all nonprofits with an educational mission. But that educational mission was broadly defined.
Right. Yeah, exactly. But it's still largely, it's a K through 12 kind of educational mission.
Yeah.
Not so higher ed doesn't qualify for this.
Right.
That's my knowledge. But
Right. I believe that's the case. Yeah.
That's true. So there's that kind of tax credit.
So what does a board need to show for any of these things? I mean, as Dion alluded to earlier, right? We're talking about giving, getting, giving and getting, and then how much is that going to be? And this is a sensitive topic for a lot of boards for a lot of reasons, more than just, is the board 100% giving? Like Dion said, that it could be that a board is 100% giving, but are they giving to their reasonable potential? The other side of that is that, especially, and I've seen more of a movement to diversify boards in any number of ways, including bringing people who are mission recipients on the boards or people who are community members on the board. And so that giving portion may not be as, you're going to have people on the board who may not be able to give as much. So you have to look at what giving means in the context of whatever organization you're part of, and to hold people to a standard, but not necessarily having that standard pegged to a dollar amount. Sometimes it is, and that's fine if you choose to go that way, but have the conversation about if somebody, a community member comes in, are they going to be able to give as much as, say, somebody who is, head of a major corporation in the city, and how do you provide dignity and buy-in for both those parties at the level at which they can participate.
And, as it relates here to the give and get how much, sometimes when the organization isn't meeting the financial balance, right? Whether there's a budget shortfall or maybe the fundraising goals haven't been met. Actually, let me focus primarily on the fundraising goals. I've seen organizations immediately look to the board members, immediately look to the executive director, or everybody's looking to the fundraising guru on staff, right? But oftentimes there needs to be a very introspective conversation with the board to say, are we doing our part, right? Because it's not just up to the staff members who are responsible for bringing money in. The board has, again, a fiduciary responsibility to also bring some of those resources in as well.
Yeah, there's kind of a saying in fundraising, top down, inside out, which means that if you're going to start a campaign, that's usually applied to big major campaigns like you're building a building, but it goes right down to the core of what you're giving every year, right? And the top is the board, right? And the board needs to give first, and they're also the insiders in the organization. They're the ones who really ought to know what's going on. So you want to start with that top down, inside out, and go to the board first and make sure that their commitment is in hand, and then start going out to other people. Because like Dion alluded to before, it's, if for grant proposals, it's the same thing. If your board is not giving to the extent that they can, why should anybody else do this? If who's going to pay for your fund if you're not already, why ask other people to pay for your fund if you're not willing to pay for it yourself? And so that's important to get started with the board first.
Indeed. And the last thing I will say here, Matt, is that, when you want your board members to be demonstrating their fiduciary responsibility and to take this give and get how much, those financial responsibilities, what's going to be really important is that you start to obviously gain buy-in with your board chair, right? And with the board members who you have on board right now. But when you start to literally recruit your members, that's something that you need to let them know before they come onto the organization, or else it's just going to be a tugging and a pulling. The other board members, the fundraiser, the ED, everybody's going to be frustrated because they're going to be thinking, well, why doesn't this person want to solicit their friends? They have this big network. Why don't they want to give more than $100, right? And then, of course, sometimes your board members who've been brought on, they feel like, well, I've been blindsided. I didn't know I was, going to be expected to give money or ask my friends. If I knew that this was the expectation, I would have politely declined. So it's important to be transparent in terms of what the organization wants the board members to do as it relates to these responsibilities.
Yeah, that's huge. And that is like a major thing to get people on board before they're on board. because yeah, I have personally seen some disasters that way.
Matt, I want to jump in. Lou has a question, Lou Grafman, about how you prioritize between major givers and annual or regular small to medium givers, which I think, Lou, are you asking in relation to the board? Probably muted.
No, I'm asking overall.
Overall, oh, okay.
Yeah, the board is obviously part of that.
Right.
Because not all board members bring different skills, obviously.
Yeah.
Some you want there, even though you know they may not be a major giver.
Right.
So I'm asking that question in the broader sense.
Okay, all right. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, and I think that there's a recognition. In fact, I know I'm thinking of a particular situation where there was that recognition that you wanted a board member there because of other skills and connections that, in this case, he brought. And yet he wasn't able to make nearly the size gifts that everybody else was, but he was able to make a gift to the level that everybody was satisfied with. The other thing, actually, and one of the ways that we addressed that was he also made a significant planned gift. And so it wasn't a today gift, it was a future gift, but it showed his personal commitment to the organization. And that's really what you're looking for there, is to be able to show that commitment that, in fact, and that's even better in some respects, because when that person was rolling off the board, that planned gift was still going to be there for the organization when he passed.
Yes, indeed. And I'll add to that, Lou, as it relates to fundraising in general. When it comes to your board participating in the fundraising process, I would say focus on the largest low-hanging fruit first, right? And on top of that, the more time you spend typically more time with your larger givers, your major donors, the people who have the larger gift capacity versus the annual givers, the people who give you perhaps the $10, $25 gifts. To get a $100 gift, you shouldn't be spending as much time with that individual as you would with somebody who can give you $100 or $1 million. Is that echo? Hello? Okay.
No, we're here.
Okay.
So Lynn Schwartz, a fellow nonprofit vet and consultant, says that she feels strongly that board members should give some kind of monetary gift.
Oh, yeah.
Regardless of whether or not, so it's not give or get, but give and get. And wanted to get your feedback on that.
No, totally. I am 100% behind that, and I hope I didn't imply otherwise.
Yeah.
Everybody has to give something. The question is how much, and where that, and being able to scale that against their own personal means of doing it and the other people in the room. They have to give something for a lot of reasons. This isn't just an external view of, well, if somebody needs to see 100% giving. It's also so that they feel like they should be at the table with everybody else, and that everybody else sees that they should be at the table there too. I mean, let's face it, not everybody on a board can give, even if the base amount might be $1,000 and everybody else, one person's giving 1,000 and everybody else is giving 10,000. People have to feel like, yeah, that person's doing what they can based on why they're here. No, everybody's got to give, no exceptions.
And what I want to, and I absolutely agree there. And one thing I do want to say here is that peer-to-peer leadership, right? Peer-to-peer influence is going to be so important, so critical to getting this off the ground with your board. You really have to have a board chair who believes in the giving and the getting, and giving to full capacity, because they're going to send the message to everybody else on your board. And then of course you also have to, if you have a development committee, the person who chairs your development committee also needs to be able to speak passionately about why it's important for everybody to give. And then they also need to make a gift that that is to their fullest capacity. I've seen boards where they've had, I kid you not, they've had millionaires on the board, and the millionaires didn't want to give more than $1,500. Now they were giving $1 million and $500,000 gifts to other organizations, but when it came to the specific organization where they were the fundraising chair, they didn't want to give more than $1,500. And that set such a low bar for everybody else. And in examples, they literally would, I've seen them literally talk others out of giving larger gifts. So those are two key people you need to be willing, and able to step up: your board chair and your development committee chair.
And I'll tell you, the place I see a lot of, I had seen a lot of nonprofits get in trouble is when board members are appointed by outside entities, because those people don't see themselves as a board member as much as they see themselves as a representative from that outside entity. And that whatever, I saw this in a college board where it was a church affiliated college board, and the district, were able to appoint board members, and they didn't see their first commitment to that board. They saw their first commitment to the organization or the church that was sending them there. And it really weakened the school's ability to raise money. Because it was, nobody in that cadre of trustees was committed to the success there as much as they were at other places.
What about?
May I just ask one follow-up question? Is there a certain percentage that the board should be giving in total against what the organization raises? So that you're not too, I don't know, have you ever talked about it in percentage terms?
Yeah, I've seen some boards give 50% of what the organization is raising. I mean, I would love, see, there's a balance there. I mean, obviously you want to see the board make a major contribution and be part of this, right? But on the other hand, wouldn't it be great if their percentage was lower because they're raising so much more money in these other areas? So, you have to weigh one against the other. Dion?
And I would agree. I've seen, like Matt said, I've seen up to 50%. Sometimes I advocate for 51%, right? Because that takes them over the threshold, and that says, listen, we are absolutely invested here. A model that I've seen with some organizations is that it's actually 100%. However, but there's a big caveat here. That those board members, and it doesn't work for every single organization, but those board members were appointed by foundations to sit on these boards. So just about every single seat on those boards they had a foundation representative. So, and then they made multiple year commitments to those organizations so that there wasn't a scramble to meet budgetary concerns every year, because they already knew that this one foundation brought in what made a $50,000 or $100,000 commitment over the next 5 years, et cetera. So, so that said, I think that's a great way to go. However, number one, it doesn't work for every organization. And number two, I personally feel like you don't want to rely too heavily on one type of income stream, because as we said earlier, it's just really important to diversify.
Now, this conversation triggers a synapse that I remember one group I worked with where the board paid for all of the operating expenses of the organization. And so that was, the accounting and the fundraising and the administrative staff and all that. That was the board's contribution, so that then they could go to donors and say, 100% of your money goes to program.
Wow.
And that was a really good marketing tactic that gave the board a very specific number to go for. And it wasn't a small number necessarily, but it really was something that they could lever, to talking to other people about what they did.
Matt, when you were, so Lou was asking, when you were saying 50%, were you saying 50% of what's raised or 50% of the whole budget?
That was
revenue.
That was of what was raised.
Of what was raised.
Yeah.
And I have one more question on this topic. So those of you on this session, I think those of us who have been development leaders on the staff side could talk about this particular topic forever, because we have all seen, and I think always as a development officer, been kind of gobsmacked that we have board members that we are pulling teeth to get a gift out of them. And it's always like, this should be like, we shouldn't be, this shouldn't be the hard one, this person who's on the board, but it happens. And I think it's always astounding, which is why we talk so much about the ins and outs of it. So the last one I wanted to ask you and Dion your opinion on is, I think the most common one for me at least has been the board member who is appointed as a representative of a corporation, and the corporation is giving very generously as a sponsor, but sometimes that board member personally doesn't give one penny personally and clearly doesn't think that they should. And then I've had others who give something personally because, they're very active on the board. And I have felt like, look, even if you're working for a corporation and you've been appointed to a board, you should give something personally.
Definitely.
Even if it's not huge. But I was wondering if you could talk to that a little bit.
Well, that comes back to what Dion was talking about earlier, which is the training and getting to people as you are recruiting them. I mean, the training process doesn't start when somebody gets elected to the board. The training process is starting when somebody is being recruited to the board. And actually, prospect research. You ought to be doing prospect research on board members so that you know that they have that capability, right? Because all fundraising is about capacity, interest, access. And if you're a board member, we have access now, and you better have interest. So are we judging the capacity right? And that should be determined before they get into the board. So yeah, this conversation needs to occur that not only are you bringing money in, right, you're getting, but you still have to give. That's still a major part of this.
Mm-hmm.
Dion?
And, Matt, I want to piggyback on something that you said there in terms of prospect research. So important in terms of knowing your donors as well as your board members' track records, right, as it relates to their philanthropic activity. If you know, or someone is rumored to have a lot of money, you really don't know that for sure. You really don't. I mean, they may very well have a lot of money, but you don't know if they're philanthropic, if they have that philanthropic gene, right? And if you do prospect research, that gives you all the information that you need to know. You can use that as a springboard to know whether or not you should be even having a conversation with someone about board engagement or even making a major gift. Some people hide their wealth, but some people are wealthy, but their biggest asset is their home, right? It just helps you to really understand before you go into these conversations, whether or not these are the people you need to be speaking to. So that way you're not sitting there, hitting your head against the wall, wondering why why you're not getting more money, why your campaigns aren't successful, and why your board members aren't making philanthropic contributions.
Well, and what I'm going to say kind of takes us slightly down a little bit different path, but grab a copy of the book, The 7 Faces of Philanthropy. Because that's an oldie but a goodie. The paradigm still works in to say that people give for different reasons. People are going to be on your board for different reasons. While everybody should be giving and getting and all that, right? You have to know why they're there and what their motivation is in a broader sense and how they might fit into a paradigm, whether they are there because they think they ought to be there for the community, whether they think that it's just something their family does, whether it's some either altruistic, this is the right thing to do, or it's a religious imperative, or they're socialites. They want to connect socially, so the board is a way of doing that. That book, The 7 Faces of Philanthropy, really kind of gives you some perspective on all that, so that you can actually have a little more balanced board when it comes to raising money.
And I've got a question, Irvin Short. In terms of the getting part, if you're trying to attract board members who can give more significantly, it would seem to me if you could inspire them, and I'd like your insights on this, by saying you're going to get access to this particular, to our greater cross-section of, let's just say it was a religious organization. You've always wanted to know more. Well, we have resources here that will make you aware of. We have gatherings that we will make you a part of, whether you're exposed to it, whether they're dinners, meeting. For some people, it may be they want more of an ability to give socially as well as monetarily. How do you guide us in terms of what can the organizations, the nonprofits that we represent, what can they give out to big donors to say it's worth it for you to be giving $25,000 a year, not $1,500?
Well, this comes right back to the 7 Faces book and knowing what motivates somebody to be part of your organization, to give back, whether that's in terms of their money or their time. And so it's a process. I mean, prospect research kind of gives you some hints, right? Of what motivates them to give, and by the way, don't think that, if somebody gives to a religious organization that they're going to be, that religious imperative motivates them. They could be, like you suggested, somebody who wants to network, or somebody who wants to feel good socially. And so they see that as a good way of moving themselves ahead. Yeah, Dion.
Yeah, and what I'll say here, Irvin, I think it's a great question. Some of the largest gifts that I've closed over the years were with some very difficult, how should I say? They were very difficult gift conversations, right? And but the piece there is that the larger the gift is that you take more time to understand and go deeper with that person individually, because you start to learn about what their individual motivating factors are. One could be they want the tax break, right? One could be they have they've done bad deeds in the past, and they see this as a way to sort of reinvent themselves and paint themselves in a new light. And some other gifts that I've closed, I had this one donor who in the first meeting essentially said, yeah, you're not going to get any money from me or my family. And I just took the time to develop that relationship and do a lot of listening. That's really so key. The organization may have its overall goals. They may want a new building, they may want these programs and these students and scholarships, but what's going to be really important is when you can tap into those psychological, that emotional relationship, when you can tap into that emotion, that trigger with that individual, you will be able to speak to that on a one-on-one basis, and then use that, I mean, not in a bad way, of course, but use that, channel that energy into the investment that they would make in your organization.
And, you know, it's important to remember that particularly board membership is not a short-term relationship. In fact, ideally, you should be spotting people on your out in your constituency now who could be a board member 5 years from now. And you're building those relationships so that they might consider board membership. And then once they are on the board, looking at their giving in a different light, so that maybe they are we'll call it a minor gift donor when they came in, and eventually, because they have that potential, become a major gift donor as they engage in the board activities more and more.
And the last thing I'll say, and I don't want to interrupt you,
No,
Matt.
please. No problem.
You know, you could literally move someone from having maybe even an adversarial relationship with your organization. Just because they say no the first time around doesn't mean no, not ever. It could be no, not now, or no, not this time, not you, not this organization. There could be a number of reasons why they say no. But we had a saying that when I was at University of Pennsylvania, we had a saying, one of my mentors would say it often. He said, walk towards the barking dog, right? If that person is taking the meeting, if that person is having conversations with you, they may be expressing some angst, they may be expressing some displeasure with the organization, something with the relationship, something that happened. But if you can listen and speak to what their concerns are, and show them that the organization has either improved, or that now that they are articulating or bringing certain things to their attention, or your attention, that this is an opportunity for them to help make a difference, you start to get that investment, right? And I had one example where that happened, and I guess a year and a half later, the person made $1 million gift. And it went from no, period, to let's unpack that. And that was at that point the largest gift that they had ever made. So there's a lot of payoff. Even if somebody says no, you really have to take the time and unpack what no means.
I think we got a couple more slides here. Let's
Go for it.
take a look, right? So one of the things you can do is support revenue generation by doing things that aren't necessarily asking for money directly. And I say that because a lot of people will on a board, or other volunteers will say, oh, I don't ask for money. I don't raise money. Well, there's a lot of things that can happen here that actually support fundraising. And this is just a kind of a quick list. But, by attending events, doing crowdfunding, hosting an event oneself, advocating. Boy, too many board members do not advocate actively for their mission. And a lot of board members, even their families don't really know what they're doing for that organization. So it's important to be out there and to let people know that yeah, I'm on the board, I support this mission. That's huge. Now, these days, leveraging your social media on behalf of the organization. So you can see that there's so many things that each person who is engaged with you can do that make a major difference in getting revenue into the organization, that is different than saying, can you make your gift today, to somebody personally. Mm-hmm. And we can get this list out to folks. we need to here.
And this is the, Matt, I'm just going to chime in because I know you and I, we've talked about this a lot, but this is the slide to really examine when you've got board members who are shying away from helping with fundraising because they think, oh, I can't ask anybody for money. Well, asking for money is a teeny tiny bit, and actually they never have to ask anybody for money. These are all the things that actually are most of the work that really will make the impact on people getting ready to make a gift. And so this is where to focus with those board members, of ask them to do some of these things. And I think that will kind of break that logjam.
Yeah, I do a little exercise in my class where, we talk about the fundraising cycle, right? Identification and qualification, solicitation, all that kind of stuff, right? And I walk up to somebody, we have a watch with a sweep hand on it, and I say, time me how long it takes me to say these words. And I look at a student and I say, can you give me $1,000 for those kids, to have something, right? And it's never over 5 seconds. And yet people throw away that whole process for that 5 seconds.
Yeah.
This is the other stuff, part of that process is what you're seeing in front of you now.
Yeah. Exactly.
All right. So what are you responsible for? This top one is huge, right? Reading the reports before you get to a board meeting. It's really important to do that, to make sure that you know what the progress is, so that you can ask intelligent and honestly not threatening questions, because you're not there to, especially board members, when you have somebody in front of you, it's not a hostile Senate committee. You want to find out what's going on so that you can be more helpful yourself. Monitoring the results as part of that, right? What are the goals? What are you doing? Okay, so what are our results here? And then, like I said, asking helpful questions. Dion?
Oh, indeed. And I think that's an excellent point, because you want to come prepared to the board meetings to have an intelligent conversation, right? And, I've seen this rule applied in other settings. It's called the power of one. And I think essentially what that means, and I'm sure you've heard it, but essentially what that means is, what can you do? How can you hold yourself accountable? How can you make sure that you are showing up and doing your part to support the organization, support the executive director in his or her role? Because that's really, and reading the reports will help you to give you some insights. And then of course there's monitoring the results. Sometimes organizations have these really great ideas and then they bolt off and then nobody follows up. Nobody knows, well, what were the results? Like, how can we get an update? Is this a way we should be moving forward? Is this a way that we should be continuing? That accountability piece is really important. Monitoring the results makes sure that there are no surprise endings at the end of the fiscal year.
Yeah. Nobody should be standing up with an easel and a sheet over it going, ta-da. Right. That just does. It's not how this stuff works. Everybody should know what the end is going to be well before the end happens.
Right.
So that's what we have here. One thing I'll recommend to you is that on the nonprofit.courses website, and we get these slides out to folks. I have a video that covers some of these topics that is really meant to be kind of an eye opener for people, to get them thinking about a lot of the things we talked about today. More than parties and grants, 10 revenue sources for your nonprofit. Because a lot of folks just think it is parties and grants. And that's not what it is.
And the last thing I'll say, and I look forward to hearing everybody's questions, is I'm going to strongly urge everybody on this call to join us for a workshop on October 14th It's going to be live. It's going to be a webinar, but we're going to be talking about how you could get some of these tax credits, very lucrative tax credits. When I tell you that there is money being left on the table, you would be stunned. We would go through case studies, we would give examples, but it would be an excellent, excellent way for you to get some of your board members as part of this process and literally get money that they can make big donations back to your organization. So just mark your calendars, October 14th, and you could reach out to me for more information.
Yeah, actually, I'll say that one of the things I really enjoyed about when I had paycheck jobs raising money for nonprofits is being able to connect people to opportunities, to each other one way or another. So you're bringing like that webinar to the attention of some of the people that you work with is a good way of showing a value added. Not only are you there for their money to ask to give to the organization, but then you also are showing you're taking an interest in what they do. And people really appreciate that, and they remember you when you're there asking for that money.
And you know what, Matt, something I want to add there, I've certainly leveraged that when I had a paycheck to paycheck job, when I was working as a frontline fundraiser. I certainly, when I went into conversations with people who might not have made a major gift before, and I'm talking major gift at that time was 100,000 and up, right? When I was going into conversations with them, what I would do is I would go in with a plan, a roadmap for how they can do that, because immediately they think, I don't have $100,000 in the bank. Why is she talking to me about making a major gift when I'm just trying to pay my bills, etc. I have to pay for my daughter's wedding. I have this, I have that. You know, you could literally say your company makes, has a 3-to-1 match. If you make this, if you contribute X number of dollars, if you're in the corporate sector, there's this match 3-to-1, right? And then of course, if it's a business owner, again, who happens to be on your board, you could also say to him, this is an opportunity. I can introduce you to somebody who could help facilitate this process. And literally, it's just money that they weren't even aware of that comes to your organization.
Good to know. That's good.
So
the one question, so I think we have time for one more question, which I think, Alex, a good question related to, wait a minute, I've lost it, about term limits. How would you recommend keeping board members engaged in giving when there are no term limits, and how to keep board members contributing after they rotate off the board? So those are two questions.
Yeah.
Those are two separate questions, but we may not even have time to thoroughly address those, but we can take a stab at both of those.
Well, real quickly about term limits. In my career lifetime, I have seen term limits kind of come up and people really embrace those. Good news, bad news there, right? Because I think if you're not, in both cases, having term limits and not having term limits, if you're not willing to have the hard conversation about somebody's giving, about somebody's participation, it doesn't matter either way. Yeah, you can let somebody rotate off the board and not renew them, right? But now you're going to waste, let's say a 3-year term, and you figured out after year 1 this person is dead weight. Now you're going to wait 2 years and have a valuable board slot there because you're not willing to have a hard conversation with somebody. Whereas I know, in fact, there was a board I worked with in Chester County that the guy said, well, we didn't have term limits. I said, okay, I want to find out about this. And he says, if they're not performing, I take them to the diner and we have a talk. I'm just saying, oh my God, no, not the diner, no. But he was right, that you had to have that talk about what's going on. And that's really, it's the discomfort part that's the problem. Now, keeping people engaged after the term limit, and that's one of the problems with term limits, right? And people feel like, well, I'm off now, I can go do other things, I've kind of checked my box. It depends on how they see their relationship with your organization. And so that's really where you have to ramp up your stewardship and keep them engaged. And that's why we have emeritus status. That's why we have honorary trustees, right, or board members, to keep them somehow as part of that organization moving forward. Dion?
I think you made the point that I was going to raise as it relates to emeritus. I think there are creative ways and adding structure to the board and outlining them in your bylaws that can be very clear and transparent, so that people understand that even if they're enjoying themselves, they're not necessarily going to get put out to pasture, right? And I think in some way having the structure and term limits and emeritus, it gives people, it protects the organization.
Dion, we lost you there.
Am I still here?
There we go. Structure and term limits and?
Structure, term limits, and it protects the organization, right? Because you want to make sure that you're completely transparent and that there isn't some major fallout that interrupts the operations and the flow. And you don't want hurt feelings. If it's somebody who is influential in your community, they could poison the well, right? And you don't want that. You want to be transparent. You want it to be smooth from beginning to the end.
Now, there's a mythology out there that the most important committee on the board is the executive committee. Not at all the case. That's good. They do a lot of the day-to-day, or they do a lot of the heavy lifting, but the most important committee on the board is the recruiting committee for board members, whatever you call it, right? The nomination committee, the board, the committee on the board, whatever. They're recruiting, and they also should be doing ongoing evaluation of board members. It's not like, oh, we need board members, gin up the recruiting committee. They're a permanent committee that stays in place, evaluating what people are doing now, and then also bringing in strategically the right people to continue your board operations.
Indeed. And
go ahead.
Last point, I'm sorry. I really want to emphasize that there's no reason why nonprofits should be struggling for cash. Okay, that is my personal belief. I've seen some organizations get creative in their thinking, and within a few short years, put some strategies in place, and within a few short years, maybe 2-3 years, literally have, sizable endowments, right? That they can leverage, and they're not running around strapped for cash. So I really want to plant that seed, because sometimes nonprofits feel, we really have to struggle because we're a nonprofit. No, you don't. You really don't. So I'm sorry, Janine.
Yeah, no, that's okay. I just was going to try to squeeze in Don's question, although, we don't have to get off at 10, but I just, Don asked a question back to grants. Does having a strong endowment hurt your chances for getting a grant? Interesting question.
No, it does not. In fact, it's funny, that shows really good fiscal responsibility, and you've been a good fiduciary of your money. That's kind of another mythology, is that, we're poor, people have to give to us or should want to give to us. No. Organizations who look like and can demonstrate that they have spent their money well, that they've been able to develop an endowment and all that, are stronger in fundraising and grant proposals and all sorts of other things.
Yes, indeed. No one wants to throw their money onto a sinking ship. Yeah.
Actually, I have a set of 4 videos on the website from where I interview a family foundation executive director who talks about some of these issues and about what goes on behind the scenes in a foundation when they consider grant applications, and they might want to take a look at those.
Great. Okay, so it is 9:56. So if I've learned anything in this session, it's funny, I've been, I'm an industry vet myself, been doing this for over 25 years, but I always still learn more. But one of the things I've learned from the questions and the participation is that we could do a whole bunch more sessions on boards and giving, boards and money, boards and engagement, the board staff partnership. I feel like there's a wide variety of questions that came up and topics, and that we will continue to put together panels and address these topics about board effectiveness and leading nonprofits, because nonprofits are the engine for doing good in our society and addressing a myriad of needs. And I love these conversations. I love having all of you with us to talk about really effectively how we can make a positive difference in the world in the end. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, Dion and Matt. Anybody who wants to stay on, Beacon is, of course, a networking organization. So anybody who wants to stay on and just meet some other people on the call and talk a little bit, it's fine. I'll stay on with you. Dion and Matt, you're welcome to stay on.
I'm happy
Matt,
to
sorry,
stay.
you were saying something and I didn't catch it.
Who, me?
Yes, you.
Oh, just that, nonprofit boards are fascinating because there are people who are not experts. And so not only in maybe the mission of the organization, but even how nonprofits work and what their responsibilities are and all that. So doing this kind of conversation and training is huge to get people engaged in what a board is and how they could function that way. I think it'll make a major impact on for the people who are serving.
Indeed.
Yeah.
And frankly, I'll say from a personal standpoint, it almost pains me sometimes to see the good work that is being done by organizations, but then yet still there's the financial gap in terms of meeting maybe an executive director who hasn't been paid in 20 years, or all this volunteer staff who are giving so selflessly to everybody else, and they would love to get paid, but then at the same time, they just don't know how to connect the resources. So, I'm very passionate about this work because I'm passionate about the mission-oriented organizations in our community, and there's just so much money there. There does not have to be a lack of resources.
Okay. All right. Well, this is great. Okay. You must have just taken the slides down, Matt.
No, but that's okay.
We did. My
Okay.
view, and it's anyway. So this was fabulous. Thank you so much, everybody, for participating and for all your good questions. And I think it's
thoughts or questions. Anything to talk
yeah.
about?
Any other last thoughts that anybody wants to share, or any pressing questions that you just had to get answered this very second?
Oh, I see Don there. I missed Don.
Don asked he was the question about endowments and grants.
Yeah, Matt was my professor at Eastern.
Oh, okay. I know a lot of people have encountered Matt through one or another.
Okay.
Really made himself one of our
good things.
Beacon is the premier executive networking organization serving the Mid-Atlantic region. To learn more, go to beaconforlife.org.